The battlefield was a cacophony of destruction, a storm of fire, metal, and smoke. It had been hours since the first wave of alien forces landed on Earth's defenses, and yet the humans held their ground. The alien invaders, armed with advanced weaponry and relentless determination, had come to conquer. But the human spirit, fueled by desperation and the will to survive, fought back with every ounce of strength they had. Among the soldiers fighting on the front lines was Sergeant Ethan Matthews. His armor, scratched and dented from the brutal firefight, felt heavier with each passing moment. The alien assault had been relentless, their ships landing with thunderous force. Yet Ethan and his comrades managed to push them back, one alien at a time. The human forces were outnumbered, but they were not easily broken. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy like a storm waiting to break. The sounds of laser fire and explosions echoed around him, but his focus was on the enemy before him. He crouched behind a barricade, his rifle aimed at an alien soldier, its metallic body glinting in the dim light of the battlefield. The alien looked almost mechanical, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. But Ethan didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger, sending a burst of bullets through the air. The alien crumpled to the ground, its body hitting the dirt with a sickening thud. Ethan quickly scanned his surroundings, making sure no other threats were near. The air was thick with the stench of burnt metal and the faint, pungent odor of alien blood. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he couldn't stop now. He had a job to do. The enemy forces were formidable, but humanity had something they didn't: resilience. The aliens might have the technology, the numbers, and the firepower, but humans had something far more dangerous: the will to fight for their home, their families, and their future. Ethan had seen it in his comrades' eyes: determination, fear, and above all, hope. But just as he was about to move forward, something unexpected happened. A child's cry echoed across the battlefield. It wasn't the usual sound of a wounded soldier or the wails of war, it was a child. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His eyes darted across the horizon, searching for the source. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw her, the alien queen. She stood tall and imposing, her regal armor glistening under the distant light of the battle, her eyes locked on the advancing humans. But what caught Ethan's attention was the small figure running at her side. A child no older than 5, with large, fearful eyes, their small body barely able to keep up with the queen's long strides. The child's face was streaked with dirt and blood, and their tiny hands were outstretched, as if searching for safety in a world that had been torn apart. The child, almost in a trance, continued to run toward the human soldiers. Ethan's mind raced. Was this some kind of trap? Was it a distraction, a move to catch the humans off guard? He had to make a decision, but in the heat of the moment, he couldn't bring himself to shoot. He wasn't sure why, but something in him told him this was different. This wasn't an enemy combatant, it was a child. The alien queen stopped dead in her tracks. Her gaze locked onto the child, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The battlefield fell silent. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched the child run, seemingly unaware of the danger surrounding them. The queen remained motionless, her eyes widening in shock, her posture rigid. She didn't move, didn't raise her weapon, didn't command her forces. It was as if she had been struck by some unspoken force, frozen by the sight before her. Then, as if by instinct, the child made a sharp turn. Their small feet carried them toward Ethan, their tiny hands reaching out for him. The queen's eyes followed the child, but she didn't stop them. The sound of the child's running feet grew louder, and before anyone could react, the child was in Ethan's arms. Ethan stood still, his rifle hanging loosely by his side. His heart skipped a beat as he looked down at the child, their small body trembling in his arms. They were scared, confused, but there was no malice in their eyes, only a deep, desperate need for safety. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't a soldier, this wasn't an enemy. This was a child caught in the midst of a war they didn't understand. For a long moment, neither the queen nor the soldiers moved. The battlefield had become a still life, a moment frozen in time. Ethan felt the child's breath against his chest, their small hands gripping his armor tightly. They didn't speak, didn't cry, they just clung to him, seeking solace in the arms of the enemy. The queen's voice broke the silence, cold and commanding. "Return my child." Ethan's heart tightened. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enough to freeze him in place. He looked up at the queen, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of anger and disbelief. She wasn't angry at him. No, there was something else in her gaze. She was confused. The child had run into his arms, and the queen, for the first time, seemed unsure of how to proceed. Ethan glanced down at the child. They were clinging to him now, their small frame shaking in fear. He didn't know what to do. The human side of him screamed to protect the child, but the soldier inside him knew the consequences. If he didn't return the child to their queen, the battle would escalate. More lives would be lost. But if he handed the child back, what would that mean for this strange, fragile moment? For a long, agonizing second, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The world around him faded, leaving only the child in his arms and the alien queen before him. He had never imagined that a moment like this would come, one where the line between enemy and ally blurred, where compassion could take precedence over duty. But in this moment, he couldn't turn away. The child, the queen, the war, it was all tied together now in ways that neither side could have predicted. Finally, with a heavy heart, Ethan made his decision. He knelt down, carefully placing the child on the ground in front of him. The child looked up at him, their eyes filled with confusion. Ethan's hand gently rested on their shoulder, a silent promise that they would be safe, that they wouldn't have to face this war alone. As he straightened up, his gaze met the queen's. She had not moved, but her eyes were different now, no longer filled with the cold, calculating intent of a conqueror, but something else. Something almost human. Ethan raised his rifle, but it wasn't aimed at the queen. It was aimed toward the horizon, where the battle raged on. The child was safe for now, but the war was far from over. And in that moment, something had shifted. Something had changed within the heart of both the human soldier and the alien queen. What that change meant for the future, only time would tell. But for now, the battlefield had fallen silent, and the weight of an unexpected bond between two enemies hung in the air. The battlefield still hummed with the remnants of chaos, but the clamor seemed distant now, muffled by the strange stillness that had descended. Ethan stood still, his hands still gripping the rifle, but his attention was no longer on the battle. His eyes were fixed on the alien queen, whose gaze remained unwavering. The child, now standing in front of him, shifted uneasily, casting nervous glances between Ethan and the queen. The alien queen's posture was rigid, every line of her towering form exuding a power that seemed at odds with the fragile moment. Her armor, an imposing display of advanced alien technology, gleamed under the light of the distant fires. But despite her intimidating presence, there was something almost vulnerable in the way she looked at her child, something Ethan hadn't expected to see. For a long while, neither the queen nor the humans moved. The atmosphere between them was thick with tension. Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he stood there, an unexpected protector of an alien child. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. What was this moment? Why had the child run to him? And why hadn't the queen, the leader of these ruthless invaders, obliterated him on the spot? The queen's eyes were not just filled with fury. There was confusion in them, a sense of loss that ran deeper than the anger she should have been feeling. Her gaze flickered between the child and Ethan, as though searching for answers that had never been asked. This was not a moment of triumph for her. It was something else, something more complex. The child, who had been clinging to Ethan moments before, now stood frozen in place, staring up at the queen. The air between the two was thick with unspoken words. The queen opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. She seemed to be gathering herself, organizing her thoughts. The harshness of the battlefield, the violence of war, was replaced by a sense of delicate negotiation, as if she were suddenly unsure of her next step. At last, she spoke, her voice cold but carrying a tremor that couldn't be ignored. "What is this betrayal?" Ethan swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. He was just a soldier. He didn't have answers for the alien queen, but what could he say? He didn't know what had compelled the child to seek him out. Maybe it was simple fear, the instinct to run toward something, anything, familiar. But there was something in the child's eyes that told him it wasn't just fear. The child had recognized something in him. And now, standing in the silence of this surreal moment, Ethan couldn't help but feel a connection to the child, a bond that defied the war that surrounded them. He glanced down at the child, who was now holding their arms tightly to their chest, as though trying to hide from the chaos in the world. They had gone from trembling in fear to standing with a newfound strength, as if they knew something had changed. Ethan couldn't help but feel protective, though he knew this wasn't his fight to win. He was a soldier bound by duty, and yet he couldn't bring himself to be the enemy to this innocent being. Ethan finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying a weight he hadn't meant to carry. "I didn't choose this, but she's just a child." The Queen's gaze flickered to Ethan, and for a brief moment her cold exterior seemed to crack. She didn't respond immediately, as if the words had struck a nerve. The battlefield around them seemed to fall away, as though the whole world had paused to witness this moment, the moment where human compassion met alien pride. "Return her," the Queen repeated, but this time her voice lacked the command it had held before. It was softer, almost pleading, though she would never admit it. The Queen's eyes never left the child, who still stood motionless before her, unwilling to return. There was a silent exchange between them, a brief flicker of recognition that passed between mother and child. The alien queen wasn't just a commander of armies, a queen of a ruthless species. She was a mother, and in that moment she was as vulnerable as any other mother. But Ethan saw something in her eyes, something he hadn't expected: hesitation. The child wasn't just an alien to him now. In the Queen's eyes, Ethan saw her fear, the fear of losing the last connection she had to a life that wasn't filled with war and destruction. Ethan's grip on the rifle loosened. This was no longer about the war. This was about something much more human, a mother and her child. He found himself in an impossible position, caught between the chaos of the war and the innocence of a child who had sought refuge in his arms. He didn't know how to respond. There was no easy answer, no clear path forward. What if he returned the child? Would the Queen continue her assault? Would this moment mean nothing in the grand scope of the battle? But what if he didn't return the child? Would that be the spark that led to humanity's ultimate destruction? What if the Queen's hesitation was only temporary, a flicker of weakness that would disappear in an instant? His thoughts were interrupted when the child took a small step forward, away from him. Ethan watched as the child slowly approached the Queen, their little feet dragging through the dirt, the weight of their decision pressing on them as much as it did on the Queen. The child's eyes never left the Queen's face, and as they reached her, they stopped. For a brief moment, the Queen and the child stood facing each other, the silence between them louder than the sounds of war. The Queen's gaze softened, just the slightest, as she reached out a hand to gently take the child's small arm. But even as the child stood in front of her, they didn't move to embrace her. Instead, they looked back at Ethan, their eyes filled with something that Ethan couldn't quite place: hope, regret. "Don't be afraid," the Queen whispered softly, her voice filled with a tenderness that seemed out of place, almost foreign to her. Ethan remained motionless, watching this exchange unfold. The child didn't respond to the Queen's words, instead standing there, looking at the Queen for a long moment. And then, just as unexpectedly as it had begun, the child's gaze shifted back to Ethan. Without warning, the child took a step backward, back toward Ethan, their little feet shuffling in the dirt. The Queen's hand hovered in the air, an outstretched gesture of command that faltered mid-motion. The Queen's breath caught in her throat as the child refused her once more, taking refuge in the arms of the enemy. It was a moment of pure defiance, a rebellion that didn't make sense, yet it felt like the only choice the child had left. Ethan could feel the weight of the child in his arms once more. They clung to him, their tiny fingers wrapped around his forearm. And this time, Ethan didn't let go. He couldn't. For the Queen, this was more than just a child rebelling against her. It was something much deeper. Something she wasn't ready to confront. "Why?" The Queen's voice cracked, her command faltering, her power slipping from her grip. Ethan didn't have an answer for her. He couldn't give her the answer she was searching for. Instead, he simply stood there, a soldier caught between two worlds. A soldier fighting for humanity's survival, and a protector unwilling to let go of a child who had shown him the kind of humanity he never expected to see on the battlefield. As the moment stretched on, Ethan realized something. No matter what happened next, the war could never be the same. He didn't know how this moment would change things, but he could feel it in his bones. This wasn't just about victory or defeat. This was about something much larger. The possibility of humanity and the alien species finding something in common, something neither of them had expected. And in that fragile moment, Ethan realized that he had become part of something greater than he could ever have imagined. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a bridge. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, thick with the tension of the battlefield. Ethan held the child in his arms, their small body trembling with fear and uncertainty, but it wasn't just fear that gripped them. There was something else in their eyes, a silent plea that seemed to reach beyond the war, beyond the lines that divided humanity from the alien forces. Ethan stood there, his mind racing, his pulse quickening as the Queen watched them. She had not moved, her form still and imposing, yet there was a flicker of something, something he couldn't quite place. Was it the weight of regret? Was it a crack in her armor, a glimpse of a mother's heart that was still bound by duty and power? He couldn't tell. All he could see was the child, their innocent face still clinging to him. The alien Queen remained silent, but her gaze was fixed on the child, her eyes dark and unreadable. It seemed like an eternity passed before she spoke again, her voice carrying the same authority as before, but there was an undeniable quiver in it now. "I demand you return her to me, human." Ethan's throat tightened. He had heard the words many times over the past few days, each spoken with the intent to command, to break the human spirit. But now, in the face of this plea, the words felt empty, hollow. There was no strength in them anymore, not the same kind of strength they had carried at the start of the war. Ethan knew this moment, this fragile interaction, could change everything, but he wasn't sure what it would change into. He took a slow, measured breath and looked down at the child in his arms. They were staring up at him now, their eyes wide with trust, but also with an uncertainty that mirrored his own. Ethan had never thought he'd find himself in a situation like this. A soldier, caught in the middle of a war, holding the child of the enemy Queen. A child who had run to him, not knowing the consequences of their actions. A child who had somehow seen in him something that transcended the lines of battle. Ethan could feel his fingers tightening around the child's fragile form. He wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but no words seemed right. He wasn't even sure what the right words would be. How could he explain to this child that their mother's war had taken away everything? How could he tell them that this battle, this destruction, wasn't their fault? He couldn't. He couldn't find the words. But in the silence, he hoped that the child knew they were safe, even if only for a moment. He looked back up at the Queen, who was still standing there, her presence unwavering. She seemed conflicted, as though the war itself had lost its meaning in the face of this small, fragile human gesture. Ethan could see it in her eyes, the struggle between the command of her people and the love she had for her child. The cold, merciless Queen who had led countless armies, who had struck fear into the hearts of millions, now stood frozen, unable to make the decision she had always made before, to fight, to conquer, to destroy. But now there was no enemy in front of her, just the child who had run to the human soldier, seeking shelter in a world that had no place for her. It wasn't just the child who had changed the course of this moment. It was the Queen herself, standing at the precipice of a decision she couldn't make. For the first time, she saw herself not as a ruler, but as a mother, a figure caught in the web of emotions that transcended command. Ethan wasn't sure how long they stood there, the battlefield around them still, as if waiting for something to break. But nothing broke. Instead, the world seemed to narrow down to just them, the Queen, the child, and the soldier. The roar of the war faded into the background. The cries of the fallen soldiers, both human and alien, grew distant and insignificant. The Queen's voice finally broke the silence again, but this time it was softer, almost vulnerable. "She is my responsibility. She was never meant to be caught in this war." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had expected many things, but not this. This admission of weakness, this vulnerability. The Queen, the symbol of strength and domination, had softened just for a moment before him. He didn't know what to say. What could he say? He wasn't here to make peace. He was here to fight, to survive. But now, standing between the child and the Queen, he wasn't sure if that was the right choice anymore. "I don't know what she saw in me," Ethan said quietly, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "But I can't give her back to you." "Not like this." The Queen's gaze sharpened, her eyes flickering with something darker. "You think you have a choice? You, a mere soldier, have no power here. You will return her." Ethan's grip on the child tightened. He didn't know if the Queen was truly threatening him, or if she was just lost in her own confusion. She had come to Earth to conquer, to annihilate humanity. But now, in the face of this child's silent plea, she seemed to be questioning everything. Her hands, once raised in command, fell to her sides. For the first time, she seemed unsure of what to do. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to meet the Queen's gaze. His hand rested on the child's head, protecting them as if they were his own. And in that quiet, unspoken moment, something shifted. He wasn't sure what it was, whether it was the weight of the war, the weight of what they had all lost. But he knew this, no matter the cost, he couldn't return the child. The queen didn't move. She simply stared at him, the command she had once held slipping away like sand through her fingers. There was no longer any fury in her eyes, only a deep, unsettling understanding. She could not force him to return the child, not now. The child had chosen to run to him, and now the queen was powerless to change that. The air between them was thick, heavy with the unsaid. The silence stretched on, but Ethan didn't move. He held his ground, determined not to be the one to break it. His thoughts raced. Was he doing the right thing? Was this the beginning of something new or the end of humanity's chance for survival? The child, sensing the change, finally broke the silence. Their small voice was soft, barely a whisper. "I'm scared." Ethan's heart twisted in his chest. He looked down at the child, their eyes wide with fear, uncertainty flooding their features. But there was no anger in their gaze, no hatred. There was only a quiet plea for comfort, for security in a world that had shown them nothing but destruction. He bent down slowly, lowering his rifle to the ground, and pulled the child into his arms again. "I know," he whispered, "but you're safe here, for now." The queen didn't move, didn't speak, but her eyes softened once more. There was something in her gaze, a flicker of something that had been lost to her for so long. A connection to a life outside of war, outside of power. And in that moment, as the war continued to rage around them, Ethan realized something. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He had become part of something much larger. He was part of a fragile hope, one that had been born not from the violence of war, but from the innocence of a child and the strange, unexpected bond that had formed between them. And no matter what happened next, that bond would remain. For the first time since the war had begun, Ethan felt a spark of something he hadn't felt before: hope.